Well, thank you very much, Pat, for that very interesting overview, of course, and as usual, very professional scene setter that he has laid out for us today. So, Pat, Patricia, ambassadors, Iar Hishig, distinguished public representatives, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back in the Glenties. Thank you, Joe, for the invitation. Indeed, the last time I was here, I was on the podium with Pat Cox as well. We seem to be together a lot at MacGill. And the title of the panel was "We Need Higher Standards of Leadership and Governance." Well, this seems equally applicable today, including from the overview and scene setter that Pat has just given you, given the pressures arising from bad governance to the east and west. And we're in an era of populism, polarisation, political poison, call it what you wish, and Ireland needs to be very alert and be able to adapt more than ever to the dangers that lurk ahead. And if we take the global trade and economic picture, Ireland has arguably done better than any other Western country in harnessing the winds of globalisation and free trade. Not only have we been a hugely successful magnet for foreign direct investment, we have become an agri-food export powerhouse, and our citizens fearlessly travel all over the world to make the most of their diverse skills and talents. That is why this era of economic isolationism and trade war should have us all on high alert. For the past 30 or 40 years, the United States and the European Union have tried to protect the rules-based international community, working together like three ships, three big ships. In fact, you'd call them maybe a fleet, steering a common course. But now that has all changed. President Trump is effectively steering the USS United States away from the other two vessels. And of course, the problem with turning a huge ship is it can take a long time to turn it back. And that is why President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, is in Washington tomorrow. And he's going to try and appeal for reflection and reason and a restoration of the values of transatlantic cooperation and solidarity that have underpinned the global world order for many decades. Now, he's not the first to go there, and I'm sure he won't be the last. And I'm afraid probably not the last foreign leader to make such a case to Mr. Trump. But the Commission is also preparing for the opposite outcome and will reluctantly be forced to react if the current US administration continues its hard line on creating a trade war. After President Trump's disrespectful behaviour towards Germany and the UK during his European visit last week, it left an awful lot of people gobsmacked, including in the United States of America. So nobody is holding their breath for an improvement in his attitude. The President seems to thrive in breaking rules and normal standards of good behaviour. So everyone, every nation, no matter how great, needs friends and allies. And we would have thought that the European Union was an ally of the United States. After all, Europeans built America. And the US has always been able to count on Europe, and we were always able to count on the United States. So it is utter folly to test these bonds to their limits and potentially beyond. By contrast, the European Union response so far has been patient, considered. It has sought to match tariff strike with tariff strike. It has complained to the appropriate World Trade Organization panels in order to safeguard the international system. It has expressed a willingness to talk about the balance of trade as a whole, rather than the particular items that have been singled out by President Trump. And we've tried to keep a clear separation between trade and security, unlike what the United States is trying to do. It's amazing that in the name of a security risk, the United States is having a trade war with the European Union. It's certainly strange stuff. So Europe's patience has not been rewarded, as we all know. And America is continuing down the same path, ramping up its threats against the European Union's car makers, against China, against anyone in sight. And the European Union, though, is ready to participate in a constructive conversation. As things stand, it does not seem likely that President Trump will steer a new course to bring their ship back to the other two. So we are confronted with a new reality, one that will have to be taken into account in future decisions for Ireland and indeed for the European Union. We will have to build in Ireland a new strategy to the United States to take account of President Trump's new normal in the United States. And how to react is becoming an urgent issue for Brussels as well. One of our conclusions should be that we must work even more together to protect and enhance the international rules-based system, not only in trade but all aspects of our national behaviour. We must become more conscious of our soft power, and Ireland has a lot of soft power, and use it intelligently. For example, we have to behave responsibly in the community of nations, honouring agreements and preferring the path of negotiation to try and resolve difficulties. Be ready to create and maintain alliances with other like-minded countries or bodies, even in the face of a tough guy posturing by the United States. Stand by countries like Ukraine, who find themselves the victims of international power play, and be ready to fight alongside China to protect international trade, but equally to press China to open itself to investment and to change its behaviour towards intellectual property. The European Union must be aware that increasingly it may find itself standing against, as well as alongside from time to time, the new United States of America. And this will have all sorts of consequences in security, in trade, and a whole host of other fields. In trade, America's new practices will throw new light on the European Union. Already our internal market is bigger than that of the United States. The standards we set for our products are increasingly global standards, and we honour our agreements. These factors make us an attractive trading partner, increasing our global power in relation to trade. In present circumstances, we have a responsibility to use this increased power honestly and in a balanced way. The world looks to the European Union more than ever, and the European Union must chart a course that protects our interests, and we must at the same time seek to maximise the common good of all trading nations. And in the leadership vacuum that we have worldwide today, created by President Trump, we must step up to the plate and we must help to develop a new normal. The current administration in the United States looks at the EU and sees it as a rival. In fact, it has been described last week by President Trump as a foe. They claim that the trade deals between the European Union and the United States punish America. In reality, these deals were not imposed on the United States. They were negotiated and accepted by the United States as a fair representation of their respective balance of interests. And more importantly, outlandish claims of a trade deficit with Europe are, to use a well-worn phrase, fake news. In reality, US companies earn $106 billion more in corporate profits in the EU than EU companies do in the United States. If these profits are added to revenues from exports, the United States has no deficit in trade or investment relationships with the European Union. Moreover, US service exports to the European Union are growing by 9% a year, gradually diminishing the deficit that does exist. So over time, the deficit will be eliminated if this trend continues. And the current standoff risks jeopardising the largest bilateral trade and investment relationship in the world. In EU agriculture and food products, for example, and drink products, we've been growing the market of the United States by double digits in the last 5 years. We have a very major market, and the EU and the United States are each other's first export destination. Our trade relationship is worth €900 billion a year, and as I said, still growing. More than 70% of all foreign direct investment into the United States comes from the European Union. This number has doubled over the last 15 years. And the EU-US trade has created 6.9 million jobs in the United States. And US companies earn more than twice as much exporting goods to the European Union as they do exporting to China. 251.5 billion euros compared to 115 billion euros in 2017. So you would wonder, where the hell is the problem? Or what is wrong with the man? This is the reality that President Trump just doesn't get, or indeed flatly rejects. And you'd have to wonder what he does want when you look and listen at the figures that speak for themselves. President Trump's strategy seems to be to force the European Union to renegotiate existing deals. And in order to soften up the European Union so that it cooperates in making itself weaker, he points to non-trade items like security, where he says the European Union does not pull its weight. And maybe we can do better here. His plan, of course, is to weaken the European Union while it's doing this internal conversation. He focuses on Germany and threatens tariffs on cars, and hopes to drive a wedge between German interests and those of the EU 27. He steers closer to President Putin, worsening the unease of our easternmost member states in the European Union. He risks fracturing NATO in order to oblige members to raise their financial contributions, and they should, and they will. And he entices Britain closer by offering a quick trade deal, hoping to create discord amongst the EU 27. But this is false gold. The only conceivable agreement would be on standards, and we all understand that this will create more problems than it would solve, particularly in relation to the Irish border. The European Union has always been very firm on protecting food standards, on environmental standards, on labour standards, and we are not going to change our minds on this. So whatever about the likelihood of British farmers and consumers accepting American standards for hormone beef or chlorine chicken on their supermarket shelves, which I suggest is very low, the EU will absolutely not allow a situation to happen where there is a risk of lower standard food imports entering the single market of the European Union. Our consumers deserve this, and this is what will happen. To survive this global trade storm without getting washed away, what's the story about Ireland? Ireland must negotiate, as we are good at, the middle ground, supporting the EU's counter-offensive actions, while maintaining an open dialogue with the United States companies who are headquartered in Dublin. It is vital that we distinguish clearly between the United States industries that support the current administration's actions, notably steel and aluminium and coal, from those that do not, tech companies and pharma companies. Ireland must also keep a close eye on the United States of America using Brexit as a leverage to destabilise the European Union. For example, by dangling the carrot of a US-UK trade deal in front of hard Brexiteers, as happened earlier this month. And of course, such actions embolden populists on this side of the Atlantic. And it is no surprise that President Trump's greatest cheerleaders in the United Kingdom are Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, given their lifelong commitment to precisely the type of fact-free populism that he has mastered. So Brexit, much like Trump's incredible insurgency all the way to the Oval Office, was a masterpiece of populism. The most recent development is the United Kingdom's government white paper, which sets out the position for in their view, the final stage of the Brexit negotiations. But what it is the final agreement, insofar as you can have an agreement now in the UK government and the House of Commons, about any document. It's an agreement amongst themselves about what their opening position should be with the EU in relation to Brexit. Of course, this has been studied by the Union's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. New rounds of talks have already begun today, but the landing zones are not very clear. If you're Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and we wish her well, because she's in a very difficult situation with the parliamentary arithmetic and all the forces that are at play, if she's faced with a situation of ruling out the single market, ruling out the customs union, ruling out regulatory alignment, well then it narrows your options in order to reach an agreement with the European Union. And this is the backdrop by where countries are advised to prepare for the worst possible scenario rather than the best. To see what's happening in the United Kingdom, you certainly have to be wise to prepare for the worst. Mrs May would have everyone believe that the White Paper is a blueprint for Britain's future in the world and in its relationship with the Union, and can it be changed? But of course, in reality, as I said earlier, it's a negotiating mandate for the UK, and it's also cannot be regarded as a take it or leave it offer. It is the starting point in a process. After 2 years, it's the first meaningful document that was put on the table. It's the first document that could be agreed with the British government internally. And its value has to be judged on its clarity and on the conditions that it creates for the discussions to advance. Mr Barnier is assessing the document, as I said. And one situation that, of course, will have to be assessed is whether Mrs May is stepping away from any of the red lines that I mentioned earlier that obliged the EU to offer last March a Canadian-type trade agreement. If she does, the European Union has said it will review its offer. We're keeping an open mind, but we're waiting all the time for the UK to say what they want. In the last few days, the Prime Minister has repeated many of the red lines, word for word, in the heat of battle with our Brexiteers. So Michel Barnier, I suppose, will have to judge whether the White Paper offers room to steer around the red lines, or what's behind the red lines, or be certain between the lines, rather than actually is what's on the lines in the White Paper. So, I'm coming to the end, Mr. Chairman. You'll be happy to hear. But there's a key question that relates to Ireland's land border with the United Kingdom, of course, is on the minds of people in Donegal and indeed the minds of people on the island of Ireland, but on the minds of the people in the European Union as well. The UK and everybody has promised that it must remain invisible as it is now. Michel Barnier will have to assess whether the arrangements proposed by the UK deliver on this promise. A stumbling block might be that the EU has offered in its backstop a special treatment for Northern Ireland, suggesting that it could remain in the single market with the EU 27. We understand that that's a difficulty for the UK, but that's what they signed up for last December and in March. And it's a considerable departure from the orthodoxy of the single market that you make an exception for anybody. And you're making an exception for Northern Ireland in this case. Now, of course, the United Kingdom wants to generalise it for the whole of the United Kingdom. This will create difficulties. And of course, the fact remains that any difficulties in the negotiation will be magnified by the internal divisions in the Conservative Party. And as we see, these are not gone away. When the Prime Minister walked away from parts of the White Paper last week, when threatened with rebellion by Mr Rees-Mogg and his group of MPs, we can expect more of this. One of the changes that she accepted, insists on similar customs arrangements for Northern Ireland as for the rest of the UK. This does not simplify the task of finding a solution to the border problem. Her rapid retreat is not a good omen. It indicates that through the months ahead, the United Kingdom will have difficulty in accepting the responsibilities of its chosen status, that of a third country. Instead, at critical points when it is asked to move away from its white paper, the Union is likely to hear the refrain, "Oh, I could never get my party to accept that." If this is so, the Union will in effect be negotiating with the hardline Brexiteers, and progress will be very difficult to achieve, if not impossible. So Ireland is getting on with the task of managing these problems to our east and west. Lines of communication to Washington and to Brussels remain open. And last week's Cabinet meeting agreed the need for 1,000 new customs and veterinary inspectors to be hired in the event of a no-deal Brexit. That is prudent from the point of view of the government to be preparing for this. But in my view, we're in for a very messy time in the weeks and months ahead. The rubber is only starting to hit the runway, as it were, and we need to remain on high alert. Thank you.